Welcome to the Asia House Global Trade Dialogue. I'm Michael Lawrence. Good morning to everyone joining us from Europe, and good afternoon, evening to those joining us from Asia. Very good to see you all, and thanks for your patience. We're a bit late getting underway, but please, we've started. The Global Trade Dialogue is the annual signature event of Asia House, where we examine the outlook for world trade with leaders from politics and business. And today we've assembled an impressive group of experts to share their views on the outlook for trade, with the world still grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic, and amid continued geopolitical tensions, massive digital disruption, and an accelerated drive for a more sustainable economy. Well, we are delighted to welcome as our keynote speaker, the UK Secretary of State for International Trade, Anne-Marie Trevelyan. Anne-Marie Trevelyan was appointed Trade Secretary 3 months ago, in fact, almost to this very day. And in this role will lead the UK's global trade strategy. The UK is seeking to forge new partnerships and trade agreements in this post-Brexit era. We've asked the Trade Secretary to brief us on her priorities, with a particular focus on how she plans to build closer trade ties with Asia. And she joins us just having reached an agreement in principle on a digital trade deal with Singapore. According to the department, it is the first digitally focused trade agreement ever signed by a European nation, agreed in record time by Anne-Marie Trevelyan and her Singapore counterpart Iswaran, who, as it happens, has spoken previously at the Asia House Global Trade Dialogue. In a moment, I'll invite the Trade Secretary to deliver today's keynote address, after which she will join me for question and answer session, and that will be followed by a panel discussions on the forces which will shape global trade in 2022. We'll look at digital disruption, the drive for sustainability, the tensions between the US and China, and the economic landscape as the world emerges from the pandemic. As usual, we are eager for you to participate in the dialogue. I'll be inviting your questions and comments throughout the session, and I encourage you to take part. Please message Asia House questions on the chat function, and we'll bring you into the program, enable you to ask your question directly to our speakers. But it is now my very great pleasure to invite Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the UK Secretary of State for International Trade, to deliver the keynote address. Trade Secretary.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. And it's a real pleasure to be able to speak to you all today, sadly not in person, technology being what we are able to use in order to ensure we keep ourselves and our families as safe as we can. Because of course the pandemic has shown us some of the challenges that it brings, but also the importance of diverse, resilient global trade networks. Supply chains were created in the age of exploration, an important part of our island story and our proud maritime traditions. The voyages of one of the earliest explorers of the Asia Pacific from our islands, the famous merchant Ralph Finch, gets a mention in Shakespeare's Macbeth. And of course, in 1786, one of Britain's greatest sailors, the Royal Navy's Captain James Cook, mapped the Pacific Ocean, yielding vital new trade routes and safe harbours for international shipping. Captain Cook's goat became the first farm animal to circumnavigate the globe, twice in fact. But Cook himself came to a sticky end while trying to kidnap the King of Hawaii, a story in itself, but his goat managed to retire back to Britain, and indeed on a government pension. I am hopeful that those perilous endeavours are unlikely to be repeated, as I'm sure the Treasury hopes too. It is perhaps though to that buccaneering spirit and entrepreneurialism of explorers like Ralph Finch and Captain Cook that we now look as an independent, sovereign, free trading nation once again, realising untapped trading opportunities with fast-growing economies and partners around the world. As we made clear in our integrated review published last year, the largest such review of the government's vision for Britain's future since the Cold War, we know that the Indo-Pacific region is absolutely vital to that future. It's home to some of the world's fastest growing economies, and it's critical to global Britain's strategic, economic, and security interests. The centre of economic gravity is moving east. By 2030, ASEAN's digital economy alone is projected to hit a colossal $1 trillion. And 65% of the world's middle-class consumers are expected to be in Asia. This will drive global demand for precisely the type of high-quality goods and services in which the UK excels. So, as we emerge from the economic shock of the pandemic, we are seizing this pivotal moment with both hands. Next year will be a 5-star year for the UK's trade agenda, as we look to begin formal negotiations on deals with Canada, with Mexico, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and India. In particular, of course, a big focus will be our plans to join the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP, a huge free trade area with a combined GDP of £8.4 trillion, including the Pacific region's most dynamic economies. And early next year, I hope to visit several CPTPP members, including Japan and Singapore, to take those discussions forward. Our ambition is to reach bilateral and multilateral deals with countries whose trade is worth more than £140 billion last year. This is a really ambitious goal that will put global Britain in pole position to pursue new opportunities, one which the Prime Minister and I are excited and determined about. We know that a revolution in e-commerce also means that transfers of services are becoming ever more important components of the international trading system. An engineer's report, a 3D print design, or an advance in machine learning can be just as valuable as the contents of a cargo container. In this new era of digital trade, the potential for UK firms in the advanced, tech-savvy and rapidly expanding markets in Asia is truly extraordinary. So, leveraging the UK's unique strengths as the world's second largest services exporter and fifth biggest exporter of digital tech services, we have a unique opportunity to get ahead of the curve. That's why, as Michael mentioned on Thursday, I was delighted to reach an agreement in principle on a digital trade agreement with Singapore, a gateway to the wider Indo-Pacific region, the world's most comprehensive and indeed the first of its kind. Reflecting the G7 digital trade principles, which we brokered under the UK presidency back in October, this DEA overhauls outdated trade rules, secures open digital markets through better cross-border data flows, and champions digital trading systems. It reforms those slashing of red tape and makes trade cheaper, faster, and indeed more secure. A great example of what two outward-looking, free trading nations can accomplish together, which we intend to build on in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. We have already become a dialogue partner of ASEAN, and we have secured FTAs in the region, including Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. We have reached agreements in principle with Australia and with New Zealand, deals that are going to create new opportunities for exporters and better choice and value for consumers. So now, in close collaboration with brilliant British businesses, we are opening up access to markets across Asia. Led by Her Majesty's fantastic trade commissioners, Simon Penny in the Middle East, John Edwards in China, Natalie Black in Asia, and Alan Gemmell in South Asia. From UK cosmetics being able to sell to the fast-growing markets of Indonesia and China, British poultry being served on Japanese tables thanks to our groundbreaking FTA, to British apples being exported to India for the first time. We are also identifying new opportunities through trade dialogues and taking our relationships further with enhanced trade partnerships. These are perhaps less likely to hit the headlines than FTAs, but they have the potential to make a real difference to British business. Take India, for example, already the UK's 15th largest trading partner. The trade partnership the Prime Minister announced in May has the ambition to double our bilateral trade by 2030, already 24 billion before the pandemic struck. An FTA could strengthen this further by unlocking opportunities in areas where UK firms are second to none. And circumstances permitting, I hope to commence talks on such an agreement during a visit to India early next year. Our ambitions in the Indo-Pacific go far beyond the economic, of course. The region is also critical to our security and global ambition to support open societies. So, as we look to seize the moment of opportunity to reshape our relationships on the world stage as global Britain, it is to our like-minded friends and allies in the Asia-Pacific that we look. And using our influence to shape international trade to reflect our core values, including freedom, fairness, sovereignty, the rule of law, and good environmentalist policies. The UK believes in open markets and fair competition, where all countries are treated fairly in the global system and businesses can compete based on merit. And in growing dynamic democracies throughout Asia, we see like-minded countries who share that outlook. OECD analysis has estimated that substantial liberalisation of market access barriers by the G20 countries alone could boost UK exports by around £75 billion a year, a truly colossal sum that would mean growth, jobs and prosperity right across the UK. So together, the UK intends to work with our Asian friends and partners to ensure nations play by the rules, to tackle the increasing systematic use of market distorting practices such as harmful industrial subsidies, unfair practices by state-owned enterprises, and forced technology transfer. We want to help create modern, fit-for-purpose WTO rules accounting for the seismic shifts in the global economy which have occurred in the more than 25 years since the Uruguay wound. We must ensure that the economic constraints of COVID do not become the chains that manacle the global trading system to a new and devastating round of protectionism, but rather a springboard towards a liberal, outward-looking, free trading future. As an independent free trading nation, the United Kingdom has a once-in-a-lifetime chance to grasp new opportunities, with the dynamic economies of South and Southeast Asia foremost amongst these. By removing unnecessary barriers to free and fair trade and ensuring that we are not strategically dependent on fair weather friends. Working with strategic partners across Asia and beyond to make the global trading system fit for the 21st century, we will strengthen our trading relationships and build better, greener and more resilient global supply chains. This will help unleash Britain's potential to power our economic recovery, making our businesses more dynamic and levelling up our country as we build back better from COVID-19. 2022 is Global Britain's five-star moment to write a new chapter in our illustrious history, pioneering the future of international trade, and I intend to seize it. Thank you.
Trade Secretary, thanks very much. We'll turn to questions now, if we may. And again, I invite you, if you'd like to take part, to please message Asia House questions. But first question from me. First, it's the first speech I've ever heard that's mentioned that cited Shakespeare, Captain Cook's goat, and the integrated review, all within a few breaths of each other. You spoke of China, you spoke of ASEAN, you spoke of CPTPP. Sorry, you didn't speak of China, and that's what's missing from this speech, I think. What is your view on the relationship with China?
So we have a very strong bilateral trade relationship with China, and I hope very much that will continue to grow in those non-strategic areas where international trade brings value. They are in many ways an important part of the UK's trading relationship, and I hope very much that that will continue. We see that with all our friends and allies. We all wish to trade effectively and well. Really importantly is that, as I say, in the work that we're going to be doing and working particularly with the WTO on making sure that international trade rules support all those who want to ensure free and fair trade across the world, that will be an area of policy that I will continue to work with allies on to champion that. And I hope that our trade with China will continue to grow.
So you hope trade with China will continue to grow, but you mentioned a couple of things in your speech. You talked about playing by the rules and unfair practices that you'd like to rid. Were you specifically referring to China there?
No, I wasn't being specific in that sense. I think where we see what we want as we help the WTO to reform, and as I say, to move into a 21st century view of what international trade is about, that actually those issues where there are market distorting practices are ones that the WTO is able to take on and to tackle, so that those who are, countries large and small, who want to trade on, free and fair rules of trade are able to do so, and the WTO is there to support them if there are problems. But that is not country specific. That for me is a global issue that we want to make sure that the WTO has the strength and the tools in its armory to be able to support businesses who want to trade fairly.
You've outlined a very ambitious agenda, and certainly the strategy seems very ambitious. Is the CPTPP the game changer? Do you see that as the #1 priority?
Yes, that's very much at the heart of the trade policy and deliverables for 2022. We're already in the process. I call the stage we're in of the exam process, where we've been sent a whole load of questions, and we have to demonstrate that our legislation supports them. I'm reliably told by officials that so far we're doing quite well in our exam test. That's very good. That process comes to an end, I think, just before Christmas, and then we hope to be able to crack on with discussions about market access in the new year. As I say, I'm hoping to get out to Japan and Singapore early in the new year, where we will be able to have those conversations in more detail.
And you would have seen, I'm sure, that South Korea has now announced its intention to join TPP. So what's your response to that?
Well, so, the UK isn't a member yet, so I'm not sure that I am, entitled to have an opinion. I think, that we want to join the CPTPP because it's a fantastic and growing trading bloc, but also one that really wants to work by, these modern trading rules that I've been talking about. And I think, if and when we are welcomed into the CPTPP family, I look forward to being able to help continue to shape that framework, and that South Korea's application would therefore follow suit. I'm told that we're at the front of the queue. We're the first ones, to apply and be processed. So hopefully that will go well, and that's what I'm focusing on right now.
Okay, what's the sort of timetable you're looking at? Do you expect it to take 12 months? Any thoughts on that?
So, trade deals, impossible to pin down, aren't they? But I'm hopeful that, I've heard nothing but positive messages from all the members already. Obviously, with Australia and New Zealand, as I say, we've nearly finished completing the FTAs with them. They're very supportive of our application, as are other members that I'm speaking to. So I hope that it will go smoothly, and I hope that we can complete something in 2022. That would be a good landing zone for me.
Tremendous. A couple of questions now from the audience. So Sherrod Cooper-Coles from HSBC. Sherrod.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you, Secretary of State, and congratulations. And very much to welcome in your speech the accent on Asia, the action on services, all warmly to be welcomed. But like Michael, I also am concerned about the government's attitude towards trade with China. If I may say so, you seem much more open-minded about China than perhaps certain other members of the cabinet. I just point out that of the 800 million middle-class consumers in Asia, 500 million of them are in China. And we've had instances in the past where officials in your own department have been worried about promoting exports to China because they thought that the ministers were not necessarily in favor of promoting exports to China. So all I would say is this is a huge opportunity. Global Britain can't mean 3/4 global Britain or half global Britain. I speak as a former ambassador to Saudi Arabia. We have to trade with nations that are not necessarily like-minded and not necessarily Western-style democracies, and maximize the advantage while being agile enough to be able to disagree on political issues. So all I would say is, on behalf of the 500 members of the China-Britain Business Council, please carry on with what you're doing. Please have a JETCO early in the new year. Please support the economic and financial dialogue. We welcome this more open-minded approach, but there's still some way to go.
Thank you. I'm not sure if there was a question in there, but I'll take the encouragement that you give. Thank you for that. You'll be pleased to hear we're just trying to pin down a date for the JETCO, which will be early in the new year. Very much to your point that we want our businesses to be able to trade with, Chinese consumers. As I always say, trade is, very simply, willing buyer, willing seller. We will continue to work more widely at the WTO on the issues of free and fair trade and market distorting practices. But for UK businesses who wish to trade with China, we are supportive. In fact, we are running a support service, which I've just given a bit of a boost to, in order to ensure that those businesses that want to do that are able to have the support from DIT to help them do that. So that continues to be the case. And as you say, those issues of broader foreign policy questions are raised very rightly by the FCDO with any country that has issues of concern to us in relation to our values. And I know that the Foreign Secretary is very focused on that across the world.
Great, thank you. Question now from Lord Stephen Green, who is Chairman of Asia House and former Trade Minister. And after Stephen, we'll go to James Kenny of Arup. Stephen.
Secretary of State, when I was Trade Minister, I think there were 20 people in the policy division, then lodged in what was the Department of Business. Since then, we've created the whole of the department that you are now overseeing. And there's been an extraordinary row of successes and achievements in the last couple of 3 years, and what you've described is a momentum that obviously continues. I think it's very exciting. I was one of, I think, many people who doubted whether it would be possible for Britain to roll over and replace as many EU treaties as was necessary at the time that the withdrawal process began, and everybody said that there are 67 treaties to renegotiate and we'd never get it done, but you have got it done. And I think that we all owe the Department of International Trade something of a round of applause for a lot of what's gone on. The inevitable question is, and I'm triggered in this by what the National Audit Office said a few days ago, about the continued adequacy of the resources to support this extraordinary ambitious agenda. As I said, when I was Trade Minister, there were, I think, 20 people in the division. There are now a lot more than that. But do you feel that the department is adequately resourced to get this extraordinary ambitious agenda done in the coming years?
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, I do. We had you will understand it well. We had a very good spending review settlement. We basically got what we asked for, which was very generous of the Treasury, precisely because this is such an important part of UK recovery and economic growth. I think we are an economic department at the heart of what the Treasury wants, which is to to grow profitability, to grow more higher paid jobs, for which obviously the Treasury always sees a benefit through the tax returns. So in a very gritty sense, this is a really important growth area for government, and we've absolutely got the Treasury support for that. But we've also, really importantly, we've got the Prime Minister's, you'll be unsurprised to hear, absolute 100% support. And the timetable that we've got for next year will indeed keep my team very busy, but we are resourced to do that alongside the long list of everyone else, literally wanting to queue up and join, either to improve the FTAs that they have with us or indeed to have those conversations. So we have any amount of work to keep us busy, but the focus, as I set out, is very much on an Indo-Pacific focus next year, because that is where such important new markets are, and we want to be at the heart of them and make sure that UK businesses can have as easy market access as possible to those existing and growing markets. So that's very much our focus. But yeah, we've got a great team. We've got sort of 1,500 out in post across the globe, sitting with our FCDO teams and working at an incredible place, and actually learning to build. I think, to your point, more and more in-depth relationships in country to make sure that our businesses have the best information and support when they want to move to exporting, or indeed to increase their exporting. One of the key areas that we've got work to do on, for which we launched the sort of more boosted export strategy just a few weeks ago, is not only with the Export Support Service, which is focused on EU trade at the moment, but will grow to the rest of the world, but to think about how we can give businesses who aren't yet exporting the opportunity and the competence to see the value in that, because we see such strong evidence of increased profitability, higher wage jobs, all those issues for those countries that are able to reach out to those export markets. So there's a whole other piece of kind of ongoing and growing DIT activity now, beyond the building those frameworks, those doors through which businesses can move, is to help businesses to develop the skills and the confidence to understand why exporting is a great thing to do as well. We're not in anywhere near the maximum exportability that our businesses could do. So I think that's an important strand of the work that DIT is going to continue to do and to grow, and to help working with key colleagues from the FSB through to the CBI to help businesses to really engage with exporting where they haven't before. So there's plenty to do, but yeah, we've got a great team here and indeed, enormous Treasury support, which, as you well know, is critically important to success.
Thank you
James
for that.
Kenny, Arab. James.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Secretary of State. I was interested in the post-COP follow-up in terms of the export strategy and focus on clean growth, and how that might actually, how much work has been done on that, where that policy might take us in the future, and what kind of particular plans you might have to build that up, and indeed whether that might feature in some of the kind of bilateral, plurilateral discussions around CTBPP and other FTAs, in terms of perhaps some of the behind the border kind of challenges around recognition of professional qualifications or visas and so forth. I would just really try to get a sense of how you are embedding that and shaping that within the policy framework.
So really important question, James, and you're exactly right. One of the key strands that I've brought in as part of how we look forwards is green trade, thinking how we can maximize how we share the extraordinary forward-leaning, world-leading skills that our UK businesses have. Having been the energy minister for the last year, I've been working very, very close with them. I mean, we are genuinely world-leading, not only in publishing our net zero strategy, but in the pace at which we're decarbonising not only the supply side of our energy systems, but also the domestic and business use of energy, and how we're leading the way in some of those technologies. So that's a really important part of what we want to be doing, helping those businesses, those service industries, to really find the opportunities to help other countries to make this journey. But there's also a really important leadership imperative here. With the COP presidency, which we hold for the coming year, and the continuing work Alok Sharma will do globally to help countries to move forwards about making their commitments. Those commitments, only help us to keep 1.5 alive if those countries can actually deliver that. And UK business leadership, across the piece, from I don't know, you take someone like Octopus, who does transformative digital systems to help customers be part of a distributed network system, to some of the big wind blade producers. We've seen UK inward investments because we're world leading, for instance, in offshore wind. 28% of all offshore wind is the UK's. I mean, it's huge leadership at the moment. How we can help them to maximise that value, and indeed to help grow our businesses here and help other countries make that shift. So that's going to be a really integral part of everything we do, and within, in terms of export widely, but obviously within the FTAs. And you'll see that we're, very, very close to completion of the legal scrubs for New Zealand and for Australia. You will see in the environmental chapters that commitment to environmental goods, and thinking about how that's such an important area, so that we can all move at pace. Clearly I want to see UK businesses get the benefit of their extraordinary leadership and technical expertise, but I also want to make sure that we are helping all those who also have to make those transitions to do that as quickly as possible. And the PM will continue to set that leadership, and expect us to find ways to help businesses to trade across the world to reach those solutions, from offshore wind through to distributed grid systems, right through to things like small modular reactors in the nuclear space, which again the UK is leading on technologically. So we're working very closely with BEIS and continuing to maintain an understanding of where our businesses want to go, and how we can help them to really maximise that global challenge of keeping 1.5 alive.
Look, thank you very much, Secretary of State. I'm afraid we're out of time. There are so many people who want to ask questions. Apologies, we can't get to all of you. Secretary of State, I do hope you'll come and speak to us again, because obviously this is an area of immense interest to all of our wider network. Very best of luck in the post. An ambitious agenda, and we wish you all the very best in achieving that. And certainly I'm sure you can count on the Asia House corporate members to work with you, and please do call on us if we can be of any assistance. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the Secretary of State for International Trade.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you very much. See you soon. Let's turn now and take a look at the global outlook for trade. We're joined now by Angela Ellard, Deputy Director General of the WTO. Angela took on this role in June of this year. She joins us now from Geneva. Kono Taro, former Japanese Foreign Minister, and most recently, Minister for Administrative Reform, where he led Japan's vaccine rollout and the digitalization of the government. He joins us from Tokyo. And Professor Tu Xin-Chuan, Dean and Professor of the China Institute for WTO Studies at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. Thank you all very much for joining us. And Kono-Taro, I'd like to start with you, if I may, on the announcement a few hours ago that South Korea is planning or hoping to join CPTPP. What's likely to be the reaction from Japan on that news?
Unlike RCEP, CPTPP is supposed to be a new regional framework to replace hub and spoke of American alliance in Pacific. So this is supposed to be a very strategic framework, not only for trade, but it is a rule-making body. It was supposed to be a rule-making body to replace the American hub and spoke relationship with Japan, South Korea, Australia, others. Unfortunately, United States government left TPP, but we have set up a CPTPP, and we are hoping to invite United Kingdom and other democratic nations to CPTPP. And South Korea is an ally of the United States, and they are a very good partner in the region. So personally, I would like to welcome South Korea to TPP. But there are two issues. One, they need to lift unscientific ban on food trade in the region. Number two, their Supreme Court has been infringing international laws. And because CPTPP is supposed to be a rule-making body in Indo-Pacific, the member state need to observe international rules. So South Korean government or South Korean judiciary branch need to fix several issues relating to international laws. And if they are successfully have done it, they would be welcome to CPTPP.
Okay, thanks. Angela Ellard, as I mentioned earlier, and I think you'd agree, there are a couple of key trends we see in global trade. The transition to digital, the huge digital disruption we've seen accelerated by the pandemic, and of course, the transition to a low carbon sustainable economy. How do you see that shaping up in 2022 and beyond?
Well, thank you. First of all, it's my pleasure to be here today to see you all and to engage in this dialogue. Yes, in my view, digital trade, the transition to digital trade, as well as the transition to a sustainable economy are the two biggest challenges that we face in the trade world. And the WTO is in the thick of both of those. So when it comes to digital trade, particularly the Indo-Pacific region is right in the middle of it, with 70% of the population online. So we definitely expect and are seeing a tremendous amount of leadership from this region as we are transitioning to more digital trade. So setting rules in the WTO, we have some negotiations underway, as well as regional negotiations as well, definitely prominent, and so good to see how many countries in the region are leading the charge on this, both bilaterally, regionally, and through the WTO. When it comes to climate, there too, we're seeing a huge shift, and the WTO is in the midst of this too. We have an environmental database that tracks the number of environmental trade-related measures, and we've seen over 4,500 since 2009. And so WTO members are reacting to this shift towards a more sustainable economy in many ways. For example, we have negotiations underway to address unsustainable fisheries subsidies, and those negotiations are quite advanced, and we're hoping to finish them very quickly. We also have an informal dialogue on plastics pollution. In addition, there's been some discussion about a WTO agreement to reduce tariffs on environmentally friendly goods, as well as a push through APEC, for example, to address services as well. And in addition to that, we should consider working on a global carbon pricing mechanism, such as through the WTO. Basically, the bottom line is that we need rules when it comes to the environment and environmental sustainability, not disputes. And the WTO can really help there.
Thanks very much. The carbon pricing piece I would very much like to get to a bit later. Professor Tu, we can't escape the fact that there's been growing tensions between the US and China and the Western China generally. How is that going to play out in 2022, and what sort of impediments is that going to be to global trade?
Thank you for having me here, and it is my privilege on this distinguished panel. With regard to your question, yes, we have to admit that there is a rising trend of geopolitical tensions between the United States and China. And actually, this has already influenced both countries' trade policies and their policies with regard to the global trading system. For China, the major countermeasure or the major reaction is so-called dual circulation strategy, which for China, I think right now, the so-called secure and reliable global value chains is very important for us. So the government, the Chinese government, is trying to increase self-reliance on some strategic and politically sensitive areas and sectors, because the US is blocking, is blocking their exports, the exports of those products to China, and has caused significant losses to some Chinese companies. So we have to take some actions. I think this is basically a passive, responsive reaction to such kind of foreign hostile actions. But generally, I think we are not seeking for a so-called full self-reliance because it is technologically impossible and economically inefficient, although maybe desirable politically. So I think China is still trying to expand its cooperation with other other partners. For example, China also has applied to join the CPTPP, which I think is intended to expand our, as I said, friend circle or whatever. So to secure our value chains.
Okay, Keynote, can I come to you? What role do you think Japan wants to play in shaping global trade going forward? Because we are in the midst of a very tense geopolitical environment. We are in the midst of massive disruption, and the world is trying to recover from the pandemic. So what role does Japan play?
Well, global trade needs to be rule-based. So we would like to cooperate with other nations to have WTO reform. I think it's long overdue, and Japan will be happy to participate all the discussion related to the WTO reform. And we are quite, we would like to take the leadership in digital issue. Japan has proposed data free flow with trust, DFFT, at G20 in Osaka. We would like to take a leadership, and we would like to negotiate with other countries about data trade. Also, there's some political issues. When we invited China to WTO, we were hoping, although China has a different political style, they could be a good player in within the international norms. Well, unfortunately, China has used the trade for political purpose. And we saw that in the midst of COVID-19. So there is a discussion of making supply chain more self-reliant. As Dr. Tu said, it is not efficient and it is not economical. but for many countries, it is serious political issues. So, but even if we are trying to bring the supply chain more domestically, I think there need to be some rules for that. So we would like to participate in a rule making for making supply chain more independent or free from some political infringement of the trade rules.
Angela Ellard, Keynote just talked about WTO reform, and that's obviously been an issue that's been running for a while. You've been in your post some 6 months now. Where do you see the areas for reform, and how confident are you that that can be achieved?
Well, thank you for the question. It is definitely an existential question for the WTO right now. And the answer to the question really is in the eye of the beholder. The WTO itself is an institution of its members. So reforming the WTO means meeting the needs of its members with respect to future rules. I think that there is widespread agreement that the WTO needs reform among the members and within the Secretariat. Of course, our Director General and myself as well agree that reform is absolutely essential to make the WTO more meaningful and more fit for its purpose today. So we have to be honest about what the WTO has done well and where it does need reform. One area where I think we've done very well is in our monitoring function, where we review continuously compliance by WTO members with their obligations. But more transparency is certainly needed there. When it comes to the negotiating functions, the question of how to reach consensus among such a broad group of members, it's proven to be quite difficult. In addition to that, what are the new rules that we should be setting? What are the topics that WTO members should be talking about? And then finally, there's our dispute settlement function, which is working well at the panel level. But when it comes to the appellate body, the next phase, that appellate body is no longer functioning because of a debate among our members about how that appellate body should be working. So we do have plenty of work to do. And I think that when it comes time for MC12, which unfortunately we had to postpone our ministerial conference, which was supposed to happen a couple of weeks ago. We had to postpone it due to the Omicron variant. We are now planning to hold it and to intensify our activities in the coming weeks. So that is a tremendous opportunity for members to have an understanding of what reform means and to get the wheels in motion.
Professor Tu, let me come back to you now on the sort of international environment and the quite hostile rhetoric between the US and China in particular. Is that impeding China's opening up? Is that slowing momentum of reform in China?
Well, actually, I think we were just celebrating or memorizing China's WTO accession. It's its 20th anniversary. The experience of China's WTO accession has told us that international rules and agreements or external environments are valuable tools to promote difficult reforms and opening up for the Chinese leadership. So at least it is a kind of less costly and a more efficient way to eliminate internal objections. So actually, we very much need a kind of a friendly and benign external environments to promote domestic reforms. But in recent years, because of rising hostility on China, it has become more difficult for the Chinese reformists to convince Chinese audience that Chinese people that international rules are fair and good for China, and there are not so many conspiracies of containing China. So just as I said, in the case of China's application to CPTPP, it is widely considered in China that this is a very ambitious step for further marketization and liberalization. And also me, just like me, I think we academia have pushed this for years. However, we are very disappointed that some members have given some kind of negative responses, doubting China's intention and willingness. I think this is really not productive. So I think this is also partly because of the United States. So anyway, I think the international society should give some positive reaction to such kind of efforts of China. Yeah, this is my
Okay.
thought.
Angela, if I may come back to you on the carbon trading point, because that's of keen interest to a lot of the sort of corporate constituents as part of our network. How do you see that shaping up? I mean, your carbon pricing is going to be a major issue, but there seems to be no one standard approach to it. And as we accelerate efforts to build sustainable global economy, that's going to be a requirement, isn't it?
Well, I agree that there's no standard approach to it. There are dozens and dozens of carbon pricing mechanisms in place right now all over the world. And that leads to, I think, a lot of uncertainty and some difficulties, I think, not only about how your product will be priced, but what the reaction is going to be by other countries about having these rules established. You know, of course, there are certain industries that will not fare well under certain carbon pricing mechanisms, while others do. So it's really something that where the WTO members need to have a very fundamental discussion about the direction that this should be heading. And we have been talking about, our Director General has mentioned several times about the need to set a global pricing, a single global price for carbon, and trying to establish the rules for that. The WTO is an ideal place for that, but we have to have that discussion. In the meantime, there are many other areas where we can be working when it comes to the environment and sustainability. And I mentioned some of those earlier. But I think in terms of looking to the future, whether it's a global pricing mechanism, whether we're talking about more regulatory ways of dealing with carbon pricing, those are all things that really need to be discussed so that we are setting policies and establishing trade through rules and not through disputes.
Okay, Professor Tu, you are an expert on the WTO. What are you looking for in terms of reform of the WTO and especially the rule-setting agenda that Angela's just mentioned?
Yes, I think the WTO has been facing difficulties in making new rules for many years. Especially kind of a grand bargaining or a single undertaking package is very, very difficult to achieve for the current WTO. But still, I think WTO can work on some specific issues one by one. For example, the WTO just reached an agreement on domestic regulations in services. I think that's a feasible way for the WTO go forward. As I said, a kind of great single undertaking package. It's always difficult. I mean, it's subject to a lot of conditions. Sometimes we have to wait for right timing. So for now, I think, as I said, although sometimes the steps look not so big, look small. But as long as we are going forward, then there will be more confidence in the system. Right now, the WTO members are still working on some joint statement initiatives like investment facilitation, MSME, and also electronic commerce. So again, as I said, I think in such under such circumstances, at least for me, I'm not expecting that the WTO could make a very big deal, but as long as we can go forward, it is still good. Thank you.
Well, look, I'm afraid we are out of time now. Keynote had to drop off because he was called into a meeting, but it just remains for me to thank our speakers, Professor Tu, thank you very much indeed, and Angela Ellard from the WTO. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Good to see you. Take care, and hopefully we'll speak to you again very soon. Thank you. Let's now explore in more depth some of the issues we were just talking about, particularly around technology and sustainability. I'm joined now by Scott Beaumont, President, Google Asia Pacific. He's joining us from Singapore. Amanda Murphy, Head of Commercial Banking, South and Southeast Asia at HSBC. She's currently in London. Vincent Cheng, Climate and Sustainability Services Lead, East Asia at Arup. He's in Hong Kong. And Zayad Haider, who's Head of Geopolitical Risk and Director of Risk Asia at McKinsey. And Zayad joins us from Singapore. Let me start with you, if I may, Zayad. The companies clearly need to factor in strategy into their strategy and their operations, the geopolitical risk that we were just talking about. How are they approaching that?
Thanks very much, Michael, and thank you for having such a great panel. I think actually it's worth just spending a minute on the context itself, because we started the conversation about the UK's trade relationship with Asia. As it happens, the trends within Asia's Asian trade and investment is becoming more intra-regional. Right, pre-pandemic, we saw about 60% of trade by Asian economies happening within the region, and FDI as well. So that's the sort of secular trend in the world where it is becoming more intra-regional. But having said that, I think the starting point for companies or governments for that matter, what are the sort of risk watch points in 2022? What is it that they need to be looking out for? And then once you've identified some of those risks, then it's a question of how to manage them. I think the first thing, and we haven't spent much time talking about it thus far, is whether the phase 1 trade deal between the US and China. The deadline actually is at the end of the year. By our most recent estimates from the Peterson Institute, China is about 60% of the way of reaching the target on imports. In short, we will probably not reach a compliance posture by the end of the year. And then what? Will the tariffs continue or not? TBD, and that of course has ripple effects for supply chains in the region. I think the second risk watch point companies have to be thinking about and are is supply chain resilience. There is a commercial dimension of that. For example, moving from just in time to just in case and having more onshoring. But there's a very strong national security dimension to that right now too, where countries are thinking about, do I want to be, outsourcing my production of solar panels or chips, or do I need to bring some of that home? Or do I need to work with a different set of countries? So that has implications for companies as well in terms of how they think about mapping supply chains. It also has opportunities for them potentially. And I think the last point that is a more strategic point is that there is an evolving geoeconomic architecture in Asia. We've talked a lot about CPTPP, right? And CPTPP, there are two questions. One, the big one is, of course, China's evolving membership application. But there's also the question of the dynamics of other countries. We heard the former foreign minister speak to Japan's view on Korea's membership. So you have CPTPP on one side, where China is applying to be a member, the US is not. You have RCEP that goes into force on the 1st of January, where China is a member, India is, and it's a very significant trade agreement, albeit of different standards. And then you have a question mark about the US's economic strategy in the Indo-Pacific. And if I'm sure many of you saw the remarks by the Commerce Secretary, where a framework will be announced next year. It has 3 elements as of now: export control harmonization, supply chain resilience, and standard setting on AI and cybersecurity. And importantly, such a framework would not have to go through the US Congress, which also means it won't entail market access. So some may argue it loses its potency. So what does that all mean then for a company's operating amidst the question mark over tariffs and trade, amidst the swings in supply chains, and then also amidst these different sort of regional economic architectures? So companies essentially are having to think about all of those different dimensions and map out what it might mean for them and what's their plan B if a particular market closes down and they have to swing to a different one from a resilience point of view. I believe
I'm very keen to explore to the US position on Asia and that plan, that framework that they are talking about announcing next year, because that obviously potentially will change the dynamics quite dramatically. But Amanda Murphy, let me come to you now, and to perhaps something more immediate. Impact of the pandemic on Asian trade, and also the disruptions to supply chain as we start to emerge from the pandemic, or at least we hope we start to emerge from the pandemic. What shape is our supply chains going to take? How different are they going to be, and how's that going to impact trade?
Well, first of all, looking at the pandemic, we know that it has created huge uncertainties and challenges right across the globe. And in the emerging markets, and including Asia, they've been really hard hit, and some face serious challenges today. We've seen medical resources pushed to, and in many cases beyond their limit. 163 million people have been pushed back into absolute poverty, and almost 5 million people have lost their lives. I think to your point, it's not over yet. And the question in many of these economies is, how can we best live with COVID? And we've seen different responses coming from different countries. In my business, that means looking at what does it mean for global commerce, for international trade. And I think there are a couple of really key reflections here. First, and Ziad has touched on globalization a little bit. I think globalization, certainly what we knew as globalization a decade ago, which was already fraying at the edges before any pandemic, I think it's changed in some parts of the world, and in Asia in particular. We've seen continued efforts and continued progress towards greater integration, more liberalization. The development of ASEAN as an economic community is a good example of that, as are the trade agreements we've already referred to today, CPTPP, RCEP, etc. All really good examples. But in other areas, protectionist and nationalist narratives have really taken root. So we've got that strange sort of conflicting attitudes at times. Now, on good news, number two, global trade is now growing again. And there are logistical issues that still affect volumes coming out of the pandemic, but volumes are growing. We're seeing ports still closed because of COVID. We've seen reduced capacity due to staffing issues. And we've seen often too many or too few shipping containers are in the wrong place in different parts of the world. And that's driven costs up and added to the challenge of delivery. But I think our view is that this should ease over time, and it will support continued volume growth. And I think the third reflection I would say is that the concept of globalized production has proven remarkably robust. Notwithstanding some of the comments made earlier on, we haven't yet seen any big permanent shifts in production capacity. Investment levels are down, but the geographical distribution of those investment patterns haven't changed yet. And the emerging markets, and especially in Asia, they're becoming wealthier, and they're becoming significant consumers as well as producers. So this makes them really a natural destination for companies that want to build resilience into supply chains. At HSBC, we did a recent Navigator survey of over 3,000 companies in Asia. And what they confirmed to us is that supply chains are being reshaped, not reshored. And that in the longer term, I think this has the potential to ignite a cycle of self-sustaining growth among and between emerging markets. And we've often heard of the long-held dream of the South-South economy, and perhaps we'll see that being closer to a reality.
Okay, Amanda, thanks. I want to turn now to Scott Beaumont. And the adoption of digital technologies accelerated dramatically through the pandemic for obvious reasons. We're holding this conference virtually, so it's an everyday event now. Where does the sort of digital piece apply, and how does it affect the global recovery, but also the sustainable recovery, which is now top of the agenda?
Yeah, hello, Michael. I mean, we started today with the Secretary of State quoting the Google Bain Temasek report on Southeast Asia, the economy report, citing that the digital economy could be worth $1 trillion by 2030. That's a bullish estimate. We stand behind it, but in order for that to come true, we will need, in particular, to light up small and medium-sized enterprises across the region. So 90% of all enterprises are in that space, and they need predictability. They need surety of what the rules of trade are going to be in order to achieve that growth. We see that small businesses with digital skills are 4 times more likely to export, and are likely to generate somewhere in the region of 60 to 80% more value added. And so in order to get to that number, we need those predictable trade rules. And so things like the agreement this week between the UK and Singapore with Latin America, and so on and so forth, are definitely going to create that surety, and done properly also reduce the burden of compliance, which tends to resonate disproportionately on smaller businesses too. We heard from the WTO, and there's been a 23-year moratorium on customs excise on digital transmissions. And hopefully when MC12 does meet, they're able to put that in place or extend that moratorium, or even put it in place permanently. So once we've got those digital skills and we've got that digital platform in place, we allow actually for a lot of movement, a lot of flexibility, a lot of creativity and innovation in a number of different ways, in a number of different parts of the economy. And when we begin to think about the recovery from COVID, that digital innovation is going to be key. When we think about other big global challenges such as sustainability, which you referred to, likewise, it's not going to be the only part of the problem, but if we're able to leverage the capabilities of an incredibly diverse region, approaching this problem from many different angles, with two of the largest countries, most critical countries in terms of sustainability agenda, China and India, also coincidentally have enormous computer science capability, then hopefully we can find the right digital construct to ensure we get the right solutions in place.
Next, got down to Richard Chang. The greening of trade has got to be a key issue for 2022 and going forward, and particularly in Asia. Where do you see the opportunities there, and where do you see the pressure points?
Thanks, Michael. Well, indeed, the prevailing of climate change agenda, rising from COP 25 actually in Paris to now 26, and also COP 25, actually have changed a lot on the business landscape and also government policy in this region. But in particular, I mean, traditionally we see trade actually can create negative kind of impacts on sustainability, because it basically driven more kind of emissions and deforestation, for example. But now we see that global kind of trade actually generate positive support on sustainable developments. And actually there's a shift in corporate sustainability, in particular of company who actually are more prepared and more willing actually to provide kind of sustainable and also responsible product and services to the market. So I mean that also riding on the kind of regional kind of commitments from many countries, including China, Japan, India, and also South Korea, the commitments of that national carbon reductions, and also some actually agreed to achieve that carbon neutrality by mid of the century. So that actually create a lot of momentum for the industry to move forward on decarbonization. So on that actually that create a lot of actually in this region that we have the kind of major exporter and also importer on what we call environmental sound technology here. You probably heard that China and now is actually the kind of biggest kind of producer and also importer on electrical vehicle, renewables, and other recycling technologies. So I think now we see that more and more, I mean that country and also the business sector and trying to help to decarbonize the industry, and then more importantly that to move from another way of producing more sustainable products, and whereby to help to create kind of sustainable developments throughout this region. So I think with this, that kind of initiative that actually create a lot of opportunities, I would say firstly as to help, I mean, all these I would say less developed country to implement their sustainable developments, because we got the kind of pressures from supply chain. They have the kind of requirement of producing more circular economy kind of initiative, and more importantly, this kind of process actually help to break what we call kind of carbon lock-in kind of practice in the past. And these kind of prices also actually help to standardize. I mean, what we are now looking for, to kind of fair trade. I mean, in the past, that we do need to kind of this kind of policy in place for them. So all in all, I mean, these kind of recent kind of momentum, both from the government, from the business, and also from the industry, actually help to create more and more opportunities for people to work not only within the border, but also across the borders.
Ziad, the energy transition is a key requirement going forward. But what's the geopolitical risks around energy transition?
Thanks, Michael. No, I think this is obviously an area where we want the world to set aside geopolitics and build on the convergence. For example, what we saw out of Glasgow, and including between the US and China, one of the rare areas of convergence we've seen this year. But of course, it's not it's not going to be risk-free. It's going to be quite a messy transition. And at least the way I think about it is there are three different cuts at this, right? Or three different sort of geopolitical tensions. One is the fact that the petro-states that we've known, and we've known the geopolitics attached to them, are not going away. The IAE has estimated that even if we hit 2050 net zero emissions, we're still going to be using about a quarter amount of the gas today and about half the amount of oil. It's not going to go away as a force. And as a result, even in the short term, we are seeing the spike in energy demands. And then we, of course, see the geopolitical clout that accrues to Russia and Saudi and some of those dynamics that are playing out in Europe right now. So there's the question of the petro-states, and in the short term, in this transition, as energy prices go off from the carbon-based sources, that dynamic. The second, I think, and more interesting and involving one is sort of the electro-states, right? We're now going to have a whole new set of players and states which are sitting on top of critical resources that feed into the green economy of the future. I would just take, for example, the Congo, which sits on top of about 2/3 of the world's supply of cobalt. That's a key ingredient in electric vehicle batteries, right? So there are the new dynamics around these states. Some of them are also caught within their own circle of conflict. And then lastly, one doesn't even have to cross borders, but within economies, within societies, the tension of doing this transition, the cost increases that will happen, and the social discontent that will play out either at the ballot box or on the streets. Now, this isn't an argument for not pursuing this energy transition with full force and conviction, but again, these are the types of risks that companies would need to be thinking about from a macro and micro point of view as they enable and support these transitions.
Amanda, I see you nodding at that, but let's look at digitalization, particularly, and how it's affecting trade finance and commercial banking in the region. And my understanding is that organizations like yours have seen a massive adoption of digital technology in the whole trade finance space. Do you see that accelerating and driving trade, especially given the technology that's now available?
Michael, there's no doubt about that. You're absolutely right. Technology has transformed the way individuals and companies, businesses operate, not just in Asia, but across the world. And I think what we saw during the pandemic was an acceleration and intensifying of that. Technology, the digital landscape has really given emerging markets an opportunity to leapfrog traditional developmental processes. And I think a positive byproduct of that is that it's enabled them to cut out some of the high polluting steps as well en route. We've got used to unicorns. We expect them to come from China. We expect to see them in India, but actually we're seeing them much more broadly based than that. Indonesia, J&T Express, Brazil, Nubank, Vinted in Lithuania, they've all passed the $1 billion mark. So they're all using digital platforms. They're all using digital innovation to really deliver to their consumers. And probably it's not just the biggest ones, Michael, where I think the opportunity is. Actually, technology offers even the smallest of SMEs a global reach. And we heard earlier on from the Secretary of State around new exporters, and we're seeing more and more exporters because of technology. And I came across a really lovely story just recently of a Singaporean food stall vendor who during the pandemic started to export vacuum packed noodles to Singaporeans across Asia. And what he found was transaction costs often prevented that, these type of business from scaling. But actually new digital products that banks have, we've got one called Global Wallet, and that reduces those costs and really enables customers to have access to a global market. So we think digital, it's only here to stay. It's going to get faster, and we've all got to make sure we are on that curve.
Scott, to you now, I mean, Asia is a leader in some respects, certainly in the innovation, but there are some challenges, and certainly I believe around talent availability. Is that going to be an impediment?
It may be, although it depends where you look. I mean, certainly if you were to look in China and India, I think you'd find an abundance of computer science talent with an extraordinary work ethic. I think when you look to places like Indonesia, you've got to be impressed by the education infrastructure that the government's putting in place there to develop the computer science talent that they need to feed their own unicorns that Amanda's just referred to. Singapore's got great ambitions and looking to provide the right incentives to build the base here. I think the issue is not so much the availability of the talent itself, just the amount of competition there's going to be for that talent. And certainly, there are a lot of companies, both global and local, that will be competing. And there's a wealth now of private finance looking to fund the next unicorns. And it's certainly a very vibrant market and a very exciting space.
But just on that, do you see Asia as almost defining innovation in the next few years, because so much seems to be coming out of Asia?
Yeah, not exclusively, but absolutely. I mean, even in areas such as payments or e-commerce, I believe there's more GMV in Asia than the rest of the world combined. Payments, certainly digital payments and the evolution of services around those payments, definitely I think Asia can claim to be ahead of the rest of the world, that's relied on the existing infrastructure that's been in place for a far longer period of time. I think what's exciting about Asia is exactly that. Sometimes if you've got a clean sheet of paper on which to innovate, you can make a lot of progress very, very quickly. So in particular areas where there's a problem but no existing infrastructure, you can make a lot of progress very, very quickly. And in those spaces, I would expect Asia to make great leaps forward.
Vincent Cheng, Asia or emerging economies, where they seem to be under some pressure from the West to accelerate their sustainability efforts. But they argue, and I heard that myself from various leaders in COP, that they're not at that stage yet. The transition for them is much tougher. Where do you see the Asia sustainability case going in the next year or two? Can emerging Asia in particular accelerate their efforts, or are they going to need more help from the West to achieve their goals?
Yes, definitely, Michael, that there needs to be some, I would say, incentive or enabler to help this developing country to arrive at the carbonization end. I think that at least there's 4 areas I think which I think is important. Firstly, that as a previous speaker mentioned about that we need to develop the rule. I mean that through WTO or others or international organization to develop this multilateral or bilateral kind of rule that helps to level the playing the game. I mean that's a very playing field. That's very important because without the rule, it's difficult to have kind of I would say the disclosure of carbon kind of things in place. So that actually is obviously number one, that I mean the international kind of society actually can help to help define what we just mentioned about the fair trade issues. Secondly, I think also important is the availability of capitals. That you look in the perspective of the whole decarbonization process, it's actually require a lot of trillions of kind of capitals to be injected into this part of the world. So I mean the availabilities of I would say capitals is definitely help a lot on that. And I mean that recently we had some positive sign. The ESG kind of investment are now booming. That I think it's a kind of very positive kind of direction to help to inject the kind of capitals to help to, for example, incentivize the markets to develop more clean energies or other kind of initiative to reduce the carbon emissions due to the productions of the products and also the delivery of services. And the third thing is also important is on the availabilities of new technologies. We heard that, I mean that this part of the world that on one hand is kind of a key exporter on many products, but on the other hand, we also need to import some of those technology or I would say expertise that's developed in other parts of the world, and so that it can readily apply on that, and probably through some localization process. So that's also very important. Lastly, certainly not least, is the availabilities of the infrastructure. In this part of the world, many, I would say, low-cost center, country that the infrastructure not that well developed. If you want to implement on top those kind of requirements on decarbonization, that we need to help them at least develop the kind of basic infrastructure so that they can help to develop more kind of sustainable I would say outcome of that. So I mean, all in all, I think that from a business perspective, that we see some positive sign moving in that directions, but certainly we need more kind of support and also inputs from the international world to help to develop this part of the world.
Okay, Dr. Cheng, thank you very much. I'm afraid we are out of time. In fact, we've run over. Just remains me to thank our panelists, Scott Beaumont, Amanda Murphy, Vincent Cheng, and Ziad Haider. Thank you all very much for joining us and sharing your insights with us. Thanks to all of you who have joined. We've had a truly global audience, and it's been a fascinating discussion. Lots more in this space. So please stay with us at Asia House over the coming months and years. So thank you all very much for joining us. Please do stay safe and stay very well. And if we don't speak beforehand, have a great holiday period, and we'll see you in 2022. Take care, everyone. Thanks, and bye for now.